Hey ho, young explorers. James Raffin here. Good to see you. I hope you've got your Science Rendezvous craft kit by now, and you've had a chance to see what's in there for resources. This video we're going to be making a birch bark bracelet. This is based on the teachings of Chuck Commander, but I just want to review what's in your kit to see what you're going to need. Again, there are 9 things in your kit. There is a knotting rope that we'll use for the Turk's Head bracelet. There is the piece of pipe and the stick that we'll use for the ayagak. There is the deer hide and the needle for making the bag of possibles. There is a piece of suede lanyard that goes to make the drawstring on the bag. There's a piece of sandpaper. There is a piece of sinew that I would suggest you divide into 3. We're going to need a piece of the sinew for this activity. A piece of birch bark, that's what we're going to need for today. So I'm going to set aside everything I don't need for this activity, and we'll concentrate on these 2 items, a piece of birch bark and a piece of sinew. Now, what you have to do in any project, exploration or otherwise, you need to kind of get set up and prepare. And part of the reason for doing that is you think about the things you'd want to achieve. And in this case, we want to make a beautiful little birch bark bracelet and to get to some knowledge of birch bark and how it works. But you need a place to work. And so in this case, this is not a very messy activity. Oh, well, I guess there's one other thing that we need we need to take out of the leather. If you haven't already done that, that's our needle that was in the leather, our darning needle that was part of that, because that's going to help us sew together. So it doesn't matter whether you want to make a house or a canoe or a basket. Typically what happens with birch bark is you have the bark and you harvest it from the tree. You use it inside out as a rule. And then you tie it together either with spruce root, or quite often it's done with sinew as well. And sinew, of course, is the tendon of an animal, a big animal like a moose or a deer or a reindeer. And the beauty of sinew is that you can use it full strength like that, or you can split it. And in this case, we're going to use it full strength. But if we wanted to split it, where you get more pieces, and of course this sinew has wax on it to help it slide, but also to help it stick together because it's a whole bunch of small fibers. So, getting to know your birch bark. There's a piece of birch bark. It's winter bark, it's dark. It's come from a wood not far from my house in Sealy's Bay. And you may want to work it a bit. You may even want to soak it in water. It'll soften it up a little bit. But you want to make sure that it's going to bend is one thing. And the other thing you want to make sure is you're going to be able to get your needle through it. Now in this case, I think I can probably get my needle through that bark not too badly. But you may think about thinning this. So the first thing you want to do is kind of clean the outside of the bark, but you can do that just by scraping it with your hands, but you also may want to split your bark. You can see what I'm doing here, splitting the bark down like that, which may give me actually enough possibly for 2 bracelets. Yeah, there we go. Whoa. Okay, I'm just going to trim off that end. Now you should have 22 centimeters or so. And you've got to make sure that that's going to go over your hand so that you can get it on. This is quite flexible. That's as a result of splitting. And in this case, what I've done is I have put a little decoration in there. On this bracelet, which happened to be a little bit wider piece of bark, I actually sewed in a bear. You can sort of see its back legs and its front legs. Here I've kind of drawn a bear, and you could do something as simple as drawing it on. And bark, you'll find out, is a really interesting material that a pencil not only marks with the lead, but it also marks it as with a sort of a dent in the bark itself. And so I'm going to do, and I would really love for you to mark up or to decorate your bracelet however you see fit. There's a bear. You could put a diamond on it like that. You could stick beads if you wanted. Put another diamond over here. Yeah. Yeah, I might do a pine tree. There's a pine tree. I might do a howling wolf sitting there. There he is. Front paws, and his snoot up to the moon. Well, this doesn't look much like a howling wolf, but there you go. To actually make the bracelet itself, we have to do some sewing. What I'd invite you to do is to get your needle and your sinew and thread your needle. And I'm using the full thickness of the sinew here because I think it'll tie the best. And I want to put a knot in the other end. And Chuck suggests you do a simple cross stitch to, I'm going to trim that off. Do a simple cross stitch to tie your bark together. So I've got my needle and sinew. And in this case, if you think you can sew right through, and I'll just do a test. If you think you can sew right through, and I can push through, that's what I would want. If you think it's going to be a little harder, you may want to find something that can help poke a hole. Now, we talked about if you've actually done the bag of possibles, we needed to make holes there too. There are all kinds of things around the house, and you need to be resourceful. That's part of the game here. Here's a skewer out of the kitchen that is used for preparing meat, and it actually makes a pretty good awl as well. I can make holes, but what else is there? That's something that was in the workshop. It's kind of a hole maker. There's an actual awl, AWL, that is here to make holes. I thought for this one I would also introduce a Major League toolkit. For sure you've got one of these in the house. It's just it's a manicure set, a cheap little manicure set from the dollar store, and it has all sorts of good tools in it. There's a tool that might be useful for the ayagak to smooth off that. But we've got tweezers. But in this case, I'm looking here. I'm thinking I've got here, and like any tool, it's sharp. It can do great work, but it could hurt you. So you need to be very, very careful. So in terms of the sewing you want to do on your bark, the cross stitch actually just makes a V, sort of a V series of V's like that. And you can mark that on if you like. And then I'd also suggest that you make places along the edge for some edge detail. These are about 1 centimeter apart. I'm putting a little pencil mark like that, and you'll see what happens when we finish this off. I'm marking those so they're sort of opposite each other on the band of bark. So I've done my test on the hand. I know that I can get it around my thumb. I've worked the bark. This one I haven't had to wet. It's actually nice and supple. I split a piece of bark. I've got my sinew with the knot in the end and it's trimmed. I only want to have a single ply of this, but I'll bring my ends together and make sure they overlap just enough. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up underneath and gently work back and forth. I may want to use the table as a press, a push. Watch you don't stick your needle into your hand. That's always a little bit sore. Remember, you've reviewed where the first aid kit is and where the help's going to come from already because you anticipated that you might stick yourself. Okay, there's one stitch. And there's on the top of the V, I'm going to come back through. Oh, that's lovely. And then I'm going to pick up the bottom of this other V. You notice how I twist my needle back and forth. And I'm going to come up the bottom of this V. Oop, missed. There we are. And then I'm going to finish by at least this pass across the bark. And every time you handle the bark, you're going to get a better idea of what its properties are and how it works. So that's got that together. That's kind of nice. Yeah, work that through. So here's what you can do on the edges now, is you can just sew along the edges where those dots are. Or you could just leave your bracelet plain. And what you're seeing is that you're adding a bit of nice detail to the edge of the bracelet. And remember that this kind of handwork allows you to think as you go, because it's sort of like a hand meditation, if you like. And you can think about the people over time. Chuck's people, the Algonquin people, who have made houses and canoes and pots and clothing out of birch bark, harvesting the bark. It's waterproof, it's abrasion proof or resistant. It's pretty amazing stuff. So I've come right around now, and I'm coming back through 2 layers at the junction. When you're finished, you can do both sides, which works well. And if you've split your bark, you might have enough to have some left over. But that's an example of a handcraft that goes back to the very beginnings of time, of a material that made just about everything under the sun for indigenous people, but that's still being used to make fun stuff like bracelets that you can wear and remember the teachings of the birch bark, of climate change, of all of the things that Chuck talked about in the Talking Birch Bark video. Hope you enjoyed it. Wear it with pride. See you next time.